Welcome back, everyone. I left you at the end of the first video with a question about whether India is a construct or not. So basically the question is, why is it that we study India as India? Is India a real thing? Why is it that we consider all these different regions together? This is a huge area, much bigger than lots of European countries that are studied separately from one another. Why is it that we study India as a whole? And so we have lots of different language families, we have lots of different cultures, we have lots of different geographies. What is it that unites India together? In general, I think what we're going to see as we cover the history of India is that it's going to be Indians that are going to unite India together. What we find is that these people are not necessarily united by their geography, or they're not necessarily united by an overarching single culture that's Indian, at least initially. But what we find is that a unified culture does develop, and there is a consistent theme of unity throughout the history of India. It's very interesting. But what we're going to see is that for whatever reason, perhaps it's geographical. All these regions are kind of bound together by the seas and by the rivers and the mountains. But what we're going to see is that it's pretty consistent that Indians choose to unite themselves together. That they recognize common experiences that they enjoy together. And so the idea of India isn't something that, let's say, the British or the Europeans just imposed from the outside and grouped these people together and called them India. We find that it's very organic, that the peoples of this peninsular subcontinent naturally unite themselves together. And so even though political unity hasn't always been the case, it's always been a goal and it's always been an ambition throughout the history of India. So I think that gives you a sense of the geography of India, and also kind of gives you an introduction to the politics and the government of India. That's another important theme of the class. It's something that we're going to look at with all these different societies. I think what you can see here is that there is this sense of unity, this goal of unity that we find in India, that I think is very interesting and in some ways quite unique. Now let's turn to some very early prehistory. And so we're going to begin with the archaeological evidence that we have from the very earliest human remains of India. And of course, as with everywhere else, the oldest remains that we have are stone remains. The use of stone tools by early Indian peoples, these tools have survived. We try and piece together and to construct what the society would have looked like based on the remains that we have available to us. And so the evidence that we have suggests that during the Stone Age, we find human beings migrating to India. We find them enjoying the fruits and plants in India. Remember, India is a very abundant land. The monsoons, the rivers, the protection from cold temperatures mean that this is a very fertile region. And so these Stone Age human beings in India are enjoying this great level of fertility. So we have evidence of some very primitive stone tools from this time. I mean, somewhat primitive. This is still, to me, this is still an amazing object. This arrowhead or spearhead that you can see here. What we find is some similarities in language. As I say, we have these families of languages that are called Indo-European languages that connect the way that we speak with the way a number of Indian languages are constructed. This has led historians, archaeologists, the people who study the very origins of human history to argue that human history is, or the history of India, these early Stone Age people, that they migrated from the Middle East. That the Middle East is this point of origin for this family of human languages. And we find human beings in Northern Europe, and we find human beings in India who seem to share some commonalities in the way that they speak. Perhaps they come from one particular place. The Middle East would be an obvious point of reference for those language families. The age that comes after the Stone Age in India is called the Mesolithic Age. And this Mesolithic Age is characterized by the tools, the stone tools that we have. So we're still in the Stone Age. This is just kind of a subcategory of the Stone Age. And the tools that the Indians have and use at this time are becoming more refined. Are becoming more sophisticated, actually are becoming smaller, as you see here, these very tiny tools. But so the tools are becoming more refined, and the human beings are starting to hunt, to use them to hunt animals. They're starting to eat meat. They're no longer eating just fruits and plants that they find. They're starting to eat meat as well. This is also considered to be an age of migration, whereas we think that the earliest human beings to live in India, the Stone Age Indians, came from the Middle East. There's a sense that the Mesolithic Age and the technologies of the Mesolithic Age perhaps have their origins in East Africa. The sea route from East Africa to India is one of the sea routes, one of the transcontinental sea routes, if you will, that seems to have been most consistently traveled throughout human history. That human beings, even of very primitive and limited societies, were always, for a very, very long time, have been able to travel from East Africa to India. And so again, some early historians and archaeologists have suggested there are some commonalities between Mesolithic tools, these tools called microliths that you can see here on the top right. There are some similarities between the technologies used in making these tools and the way these tools are used with some of the very early civilizations we find in East Africa. And so there's an argument made that either, and this is always the question, right? Does this mean that the original Stone Age Indians, that they were continuing to work on their stone sharpening skills and they're creating stone tools, and they just got better, and they got better in the same way that other people around the world got better at creating stone tools? Doesn't seem entirely far-fetched. There's a limit to the different ways that you can develop stone tools. Makes sense that societies that share other similarities would develop their tools in a similar way. Is that the case? Or is it the case that we see this change because a new group of people who bring with them a new way of life and a new set of technologies have come into India? So there's another kind of broader question just to think about in terms of studying ancient history. Why is it that we see commonalities? Are commonalities a sign of a common ancestor, or are they a sign of development within a particular group and a particular culture? So yeah, I would challenge you to think about that in the same way that you think about the extent to which geography determines and shapes human societies. And I would encourage you to think about the construct of India, the degree to which India is a construct. Hunting we've talked about already, and then in the bottom right here you can see, and you can see this more clearly if you use the PowerPoint that I've uploaded to the weekly module, you can see that we start to find cave drawings from this period. And this is really interesting. It says lots of really interesting things about the way in which the history of India is starting to develop. That now we don't just have tools, we have conscious efforts by these people to express themselves and to leave these expressions for other people. These aren't just tools that people use for everyday life. Here we've confined to people who have emotions like ourselves. We can find that somehow, and this is, of course, the great mystery and, to my mind, the great attraction of history. These people who lived thousands and thousands of miles away, thousands and thousands of years ago, still share with us the same common emotions, a lot of the same basic desires and fears. And so, and this is perhaps even more interesting, a desire to convey them. A desire to convey them through paintings in this instance, but also through words. And I mean, we're going to be coming to words soon. But so with the emergence of cave paintings, this is still a prehistoric society, but it's becoming a more and more historic society in terms of the fact that we can study these people as part of our common human history. And so this is what we start to see with the Mesolithic period. We start to see human beings as problem solvers in the way that they develop these new tools and they develop this new way of living by hunting the animals, or an additional way of living, and that they have human emotions that we see in these cave drawings. We think, again, this is based on skeletal remains, it's from a long time ago, but we think that life expectancy at this time was still pretty short, probably somewhere between 20 and 40 years. I talked about this, those of you who took my Ancient Greece and Rome class last semester. I mean, it just kind of changes everything. Imagine if you only have 40 years to do everything that you want to do in your life, or less. Everything, I imagine, is very different. It seems as though you're probably more concerned about perhaps the more fundamental things in life. Certainly not going to be saving for retirement if you're only living for 40 years, for example. So this is just talked about some similarities between us and the prehistoric Indian society. There's a difference. They share a similar way of conveying information and a desire to convey that information that we do, but then the difference is that they only live for 20 or 40 years, and that's assuming they survive infant mortality, which you can imagine would have been pretty high. Okay, I'm going to leave it there for this video, and then I'm going to talk about the Neolithic Revolution in the last video for this week.